I'm going to show you how to build an SD-WAN environment inside of vManage so that you can study for that Cisco certification that you've been working on, or so that you can just learn how SD-WAN works in the real world. And we're going to start right now. SD-WAN is a fabric, and since it's a fabric, it's made up of components, and we need to understand those components. The first set of devices that we're going to focus on are going to be controllers, and adding those controllers to our fabric in such a way that we can actually leverage them. But one of the main elements that gets ignored a lot of time in many classes is going to be the concept of high availability. Now, high availability is the manner in which that I can assure that these devices can operate in failover for one another and be highly available. And keep in mind that we have to have some fundamental understanding of what these controllers do for us. As a result, we need to actually make certain that we have a firm understanding of what they do. Again, at bare minimum. Now, what we're going to do is, first of all, in this class, we're going to build vManage. In fact, we're going to build 3 vManage, and what we're going to do is we're going to set those vManage up in such a way that they're going to be part of a highly available active cluster. Now, for those of you that don't know, the vManage is going to be the single pane of glass that I'm going to use to manage my SEN, my Secure Extensible Network, and it's going to be done traditionally through a graphical user interface or through an API. Either methodology allows me to implement a role-based access control mechanism in order to ensure that I am who I say I am, and that I, as the administrator, can actually allocate specific privileges and rights to you, a given user or a given administrator. So please keep in mind there's a lot of theory behind this, but just from the perspective of this particular class, the main goal here is to focus on the idea that we need vManages in order to be able to operate. And what we want to do is we want to build a highly available cluster of these devices, these virtual machines, that are going to afford us the capability of building the remainder of our infrastructure and fabric. So let's go ahead and dive in and start getting those onboarded, certified, and functional. What you see here is our lab. We can see that we have a number of devices and resources, and what we need to do is we need to become familiar with these resources, and we need to get them configured. Now, our main focus right now is going to be on the vManage devices, and you'll notice in this lab, in Site 1000, we have 3 vManage VMs. I'm going to go ahead and open up sessions to each of these, and what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and get the first stage of configuration working, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to let that run in the background, and as soon as it's done, what I'll do is I will come back. I'll be pausing the video. So let's go ahead and log in. The default logins are admin. You can see here specifically that we're using version 204.1, latest and greatest. These devices require us to enter or change the default password, but I'm going to put it back to where it was. So I just want to say admin. And what I need to do now is I'm going to have to format the drive of this device. This is going to take a few moments, which is why I'm going to go ahead and get all of these started. And what we'll do is we'll pause the video and come back once they're done. It takes about anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes. So admin. We want to go ahead and format block 1, and we'll say yes. And then the last vManage. Admin. Admin. Must have fat fingered it. Yes. And yes. Now, like I said, it's going to take about 8 or so minutes for these devices to actually return to an operational state, and I will return when that's done. Okay, we can see by virtue of the fact that we see the announcement here of system ready that these devices are now actually able to be and ready to be configured. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to vManage 1. I'm going to go ahead and minimize these. And what I want to do is I want to focus on this first vManage, and I want to do it in the context of the lab. What we see here is that vManage 1 has an Ethernet 0 interface that should have the IP address of 100.100.100.2/24, and that's connected to my internet cloud. We can see that all of the resources in this lab that are going to be connected to the internet configuration here, the internet cloud, is actually going to be part of the same subnet. Now, that's just the way that I chose to build this lab in order to try to keep things simplified. Any communication that exits my infrastructure will actually go to this gateway router and be delivered to the ISP or be able to jump over to MPLS. Now, at some point, we may terminate the connection between MPLS and gateway in order to be able to completely restrict the MPLS environment, but that's the way things go right now, and this is how we have things currently configured. Our main focus right now is going to be to onboard vManage 1, and in order to onboard it, we've got to log into it, so that will be admin, admin. And what we're going to do is we need to do the baseline configuration. Now, in this lab, I can provide the configuration files and put them up on GitHub if you guys want those. You can ask for those, or if that's something that you guys want, just let me know in the comments, and I'll try to get that uploaded as quickly as possible for those of you that want to follow along. Also, I can provide you this lab in the form of an exported file so that you can actually bring it into your own vManage configuration. So what we want to do right now is go ahead and get into the config for the vManage. I'm going to go into the system configurations, and I'm going to assign this device a host name. Now, in fact, you'll remember that we have a number of things that are mandatory. So manage vManage -1. We need to assign it a system IP address. That system IP address for the purposes of this lab will be 172.255.255. And I'm going to take the 4th octet and use that in this space for the most part. We'll have to get creative when we start looking at some of the other devices. But right now, this is going to be system IP of 2. And we also know that this is going to be in the site ID of 1000. In fact, I'll point that out right here, site ID 1000. We can see that. And what I want to do next is I'm going to give it its organizational name. Organization name is going to be sd-wan-adv-lab. And I need to give it the identity of our vBond. Now, bear in mind, I said specifically that we were going to be focusing on high availability. And as such, I want to make certain that all of my controllers are highly available in our environment. Now, what that translates to is that we're going to have more than one vBond. And just to put it out here, I promised, too long didn't read style approach to theory. We need to make certain that we utilize fully qualified domain naming in order to be able to have a group of vBonds provide services in our fabric. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to implement the vBond using DNS. So I'm going to come in and I'll say vBond will be vBond.micronicslab.com. And as a direct result of this, I need to make certain that this device can communicate to our DNS server. Our DNS server is going to be located at the address of 172.16.100.100, and it runs on the gateway router that I pointed out earlier. So let's go ahead and get into VPN 0. And what we want to do is we want to make certain that we first of all satisfy reachability requirements. I'm not running a routing protocol, so I'm going to use a default route, and I'm going to point that default route to 100.100.100, which is the IP address of the gateway router, which is going to be the next hop address to exit the segment of 100.100.100.0/24. And I also need to define the DNS server. I said it was going to be 172.16.100.100. Now I need to configure the interface for my vManage. So I'll say interface Ethernet 0. We can see that right here in the drawing. And I need to assign it this IP address. So it will be IP address 100.100.100.2/24. We will say no shut. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say commit and quit. Now, as a result of this, this should actually allow me to see my new device name, and I also want to be able to test reachability. So first of all, I'm going to ping 100.100.100 to see if I can get to my gateway of last resort, and I can. Next, I'm going to ping 8.8.8.8 to see if I can get out of this environment into the internet. Yes, I can. And finally, what I want to do is I want to make certain that I can resolve DNS reachability. I will say ping www.google.com. And we see all of those are indeed working. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and do this configuration for the remaining vManage. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize this one, and I'm going to go to vManage 2. and I'm going to give vManage2 its configuration. So again, I'll just set this up so that we can see it. I'll log in admin, config. We'll go to the system configurations first, where we'll assign the host name. This is going to be vManage2. We will do the system IP. The system IP address will be 172.255.255, and I said I would give it the 4th octet. This guy should be 12. The site ID is going to be 1000. The organizational name is going to end up being the, let's see, sd-wan ADV lab. Then what we will do is we will give it the identity of the vBond. So again, located at vbond.mychronicslab.com. And let's see, we've got the host name, system IP, site ID, org name, and vBond. We should be good to go there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to VPN 0 and ensure that I get the reachability. First of all, IP route, my static default route pointing to 100, 100, 100.1. Next, I'm going to go ahead and define the DNS. So we'll say DNS is 172.16.100.100. Interface Ethernet 0, give it the IP address of 100, 100, 100.12/24, which is found right here. We will no shut this interface. We will commit and quit. And again, I just want to do a quick verification. Let's see if I can hit the gateway. Let's see if I can hit the outside world. I'll just ping www.google.com and I can reach it. So the next thing I want to do is, just as another test, I should have probably done this on vManage 1, but let's go ahead and see if I can ping vbond.mychronicslab.com. It does resolve the identity of the vBond, but I haven't built the vBonds. So that's why I didn't test it on vManage 1, but I did want to make certain that it did actually resolve the IP address of what one of my vBonds is going to be. And if I scroll down and look at the vBond, you can see it's going to be 100, 100.100.3. So that is exactly what I want to have going on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to minimize this one and go into vManage 3 and wrap this up. So we'll go ahead and do admin, config, system, host-name is going to be vManage 3. Then we will do the system IP, which is going to be 172.255.255.13. We see the 4th octet right here. The site ID is going to be 1000. The organizational name is going to be sd-wan ADV lab. And my vBond is going to be located at vbond.mychronicslab.com. VPN 0, IP route, quad 0. We'll punch that out towards the 100.100.100.1 address. The DNS is going to be 172.16.100.100. And I could have said primary here now, but it will actually take that and list it as primary. I'll go ahead and illustrate that once I get this done. I'll say interface Ethernet 0. IP address will be 100, 100, 100.13/24, no shut. And we will say commit and quit. Now I'm going to say show run VPN 0, and we'll see here, you'll notice that it did adopt this. Since it was the only entry that I provided, it is my primary, and that's going to be my internal DNS server, and that internal DNS server, as I said earlier, is running on my gateway router. So again, just one final test. Let's see, can I ping the other devices? So can I ping vManage 1? And I need to ping vManage 2, which is 12. Sure can. So lastly, let's just do a real quick check to make sure we can get off this unresolved DNS. And we can. So what we've got now is we have 3 fully functional vManage components as it relates to the idea of just IP reachability. They are not part of a single fabric at this time. And that's the next thing that I want to take a look at. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and open up our jump box, which is the device that we're going to be using in the lab to actually interact with these devices. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open up my browser and I'm going to try to browse to the IP address https 100.100.100.2, which is my first vManage. And let's see if it's going to let me log in. I will try the credentials of admin, hit continue, enter the password of admin, log in, and let's see if it lets me in. Now, it may or may not be ready given the amount of time that I've taken to get things set up, but in this specific instance, we do see that we have a vManage management console, and that vManage management console is ready for me to begin configuration. Now, we've created the 3 vManage, and what we want to do now is we want to begin looking at the idea of getting all of these resources integrated under one umbrella. Now, the intent here is to take all 3 vManage and integrate them into a cluster. And what I want to do is I want to talk about exactly how that takes place. So from the perspective of the user interface, for the time being, let's just ignore this little message right here. I'm going to cover that shortly. But what I want to do right now is I just want to get it to where we see that we have 3 vManage resources in our infrastructure. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to administration, and I need to do some baseline settings for my vManage itself. Now, you'll note when I did my configuration at the CLI, I entered information about my organizational name, the identity of the vBond, and what you're going to see is none of that information has translated to the graphical user environment. So we're going to go ahead and manually do that. I'm going to come over to my organizational name and I'm going to hit edit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and define sd-wan-adv-lab for both my organizational name, we'll just say SD-WAN, and the verification of my organizational name. Hit save. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the identity of my vBond. Remember, we used a fully qualified domain name of vbond.micronics.lab, and we'll use the default interface or the default port of 12346. Again, that will be covered in a deeper dive on theory, separate and apart from lab configuration. Next thing I want to do is I want to look at how things are actually going to be authenticated. Notice WAN Edge certificate authentication is going to be automated. I want to leave that, but notice that the controllers, that's what we're focusing on right now, certificate authorization is coming from Cisco. Well, I have not integrated this lab with Cisco, so what I'm going to do is I want to actually change this behavior so that I can implement a self-signed enterprise root certificate configuration. Now, to expedite this lab, what I've done is I've already created a root certificate. I'm going to go into my command line on this Linux machine. I'm going to type ls, and what you're going to see here is a listing of files. This is my root certificate, sdwan.pim. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type cat sdwan.pim, and I want to grab the contents of this file and paste it into that section in the vManage. So I'm going to say copy. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the vManage. And I'm just simply going to paste that information into this window. Do not, for the time being, unless I ever tell you otherwise, don't use the set CSR properties. As a result of the fact that we're not using a server, we're just manually signing the certificates on a Linux machine. I've just run into issues where that's caused problems. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say import and save. And this should actually be changed. So now notice controller certificate authorization is coming from enterprise. Now, another thing that I want to point out here is that you'll also notice that we have some things like our statistics settings. We have, if I scroll down, we're going to see some things about multi-tenancy mode. We'll talk about that near the end of the series. We have the idea of, I want to get to the data collection is enabled, but what I want to do is I want to look at statistics configuration. I'm going to collect data. Yes, it's on, but you'll notice here that the collection interval is going to be 30 minutes. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it to the minimum, which is going to be 5 minutes. Now, what this is going to do for us is this is going to make information show up sooner inside of the graphical user interface when it comes time for us to implement things like policy. But please be patient. We'll get there, I promise. Now, bear in mind that that setting that I just made is going to end up requiring a reboot. Now, I'm not really too concerned with that because obviously when I add this to the cluster, I'm just, to be safe, I'm going to reboot the device itself. So let's take a look at what's going on. And what I'm going to do is now is I'm going to go back up to the administration. And what I want to do is I want to, actually, let's go back up to the main dashboard. And from the main dashboard, we'll still see that we only have the one vManage. And what I want to do is I want to change this. I want to add the other two to the mix. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into administration, and you'll see there's a function down here called cluster management. Now, this is odd, because the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and say, I want to add a vManage to this cluster. We can see I'm running vManage 1. That's me. That's the device that I'm on. And we see that the status is ready. The application server is running. The statistics database service is running. The configuration database is running. The messaging server is running. And I am not running an SDAVC, but we will. Right now, what I want to do is I want to focus on getting these three resources part of our SDWAN fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit add vManage, and it's going to give me something that looks a little strange. Now, what this is saying is it's saying configuring the IP address on the local device is required before adding a new vManage. Now, what this is really saying is that this particular vManage is not currently part of a cluster, and we need to notify the device that it is going to be part of a cluster. So what we need to do is we need to register the current IP address, 100.100.100.2, as part of this cluster. We provide the login information, and the system knows that. Again, I'm going to leave SDAVC, which is the software-defined application visibility and control engine, offline, but we will be adding it later in the series. I'm going to go ahead and hit update, and what this is going to do is this is going to, in order to apply these changes, the device will need to be rebooted. And do you want to make these changes? Yes. Now, once this is done, once the configuration goes into place, notice it says vManage successfully edited. It will now go down for a reboot. Now, I'm impatient. I'm not going to want to wait for that reboot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually do the reboot. I'll come into vManage 1 and I'm going to type reboot. Yes, I want it to reboot, and the system should go down and come back up. Now, obviously, this is going to take a few moments, and this is a day zero operation when we're bringing up our environment. So I want to make certain that you guys are aware of this and can see the fact that adding and creating this cluster could, would, and will be disruptive to a functional environment, which is, again, why it's part of our day zero operations. So this is going to take some time for this device to come back up and become operational. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording and pick it up once it's done. All right, it's been about 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and see if we can log into the device. It does say system is ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into admin. And what I like to do is I like to execute a command of request nms all status. It's going to return a status output for every one of the services that are running. And you'll notice that it's enabled and when it's running, how long it's been running. Now, one of the key things that we want to make certain before we can actually really interact with this device is the application server must be running, because that's going to be what the graphical user interface is going to be connecting to. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to see if I can reconnect to HTTPS 100. 100.100.2. And I can. Let's go ahead and see if I can log in. Admin. And admin. All right, again, we're ignoring the database message here. This isn't an error, it's just a warning. It's telling us that we're actually using the default password, which is password, for this database. So obviously we're going to want to correct that, but not yet. Right now, let's go into our administration to cluster management, and we should see that everything is still good, everything is checked. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another vManage. The vManage that I'm going to add is going to be located at 100.100.100.12, admin, and I want to go ahead and run statistics, database, and messaging server. So let's go ahead and hit add. And what this is going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to add that resource to this cluster, and it will be in a pending state for quite a while. I've actually seen this last upward to 10 minutes. Now, obviously, we're going to have to repeat this for the third device, but I'm going to wait until this one has gone ready and configured, and we can see that it is going to be offering the services. And bear in mind, in this version of SD-WAN, we have the concept of an active cluster. It's no longer just waiting for one to fail to assume the roles and duties. So every server or every vManage that is going to be running the same service, we will actually get replication between these resources. Ideally, we should try to effort seeing 3 of these. And just while it's pending, let's go ahead and take a look at vManage 2. And what I'm looking to do here is observe what's going to happen. But what I think we are going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. About 10 minutes have passed, and I'm coming back in, and we can take a look at the graphical user interface and see that we now have 2 vManage that are actually running replicated services. So in this particular instance, that means that application services are being provided by each of the 2 devices that are part of my vManage cluster. It also should be pointed out that if I go to the main dashboard, I should see 2 vManage inside of the graphical user interface. Now, what I want to do is I want to add that 3rd device. And in order to add that 3rd device, I'm just simply going to repeat the process. So I'm going to go back down to administration, cluster management, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add the 3rd vManage. Its 4th octet is 13. And I'll again just go ahead and run the same services on it. We'll go ahead and hit add, and we're going to let this device come up and become part of the infrastructure. And then the next part of this is going to be to ensure that we actually can get all of our certificates signed and installed on these 3 vManage. But obviously, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first one and work our way through. So again, it's going to be about 10 more minutes before this thing completes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here. Okay, we can see right now that we have 3 functional vManage. They're all running the configuration, but we're not done yet. What I want to do is let's go back to the main dashboard. And from the main dashboard, let's take a look at the fact that we have the 3 vManage. But what I'll call your attention to here is that these 3 vManages are invalid. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that they do not have any certificates. So the serial number, no certificate installed, no certificate installed, no certificate installed. Expiration status is invalid since nothing is installed. So what we've got to do next is we've got to actually get these resources such that they are going to be able to have valid certificates. Now, the drawback to this in our lab is the fact that this is something that we're going to have to do manually. Based on the fact that this resource isn't connected, I do not have service contracts with Cisco as far as authentication and onboarding services, nor did they actually bring on my actual resources. I'm building this. This is what we refer to as an on-prem scenario. What I've got to do is I've got to sign everything. And this can get kind of protracted. It can get kind of complicated. But honestly, it's really not that difficult as long as you're willing to pay attention to what you're doing and you learn the basic command syntax. So what I'm going to do right now is, first of all, I need to get the root CA installed on these 3 devices. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into my jump box. And from my jump box, I'm going to go into my CLI. And inside of here, I'm going to do an ls. And what you're going to see is, remember I mentioned this sd-wan.pim file. This is our root CA. Now, that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to need to make available to every one of the controllers that we onboard, as well as make it available to the individual WAN edges when the time comes to turn them up. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to simply SCP this file, sd-wan.pim, and I'm going to send it to each of my vManage controllers. So I'm going to say admin at 100.100.100.2, and I want to send that file over, and we can see here that I need to remove my known host. So I'll just say rm-f, and if you run into this, it's no big deal. Just grab this, the contents of what's between these parentheses, copy it, paste it over, hit enter. It'll remove that file, and now I'll be able to actually do the transfer. So I'll say yes. All that was indicative of the fact that I'd connected to a resource once before that had that same IP address, but the fingerprint had changed. So let's see, we'll do admin, copy it over. I'm going to go ahead and send it to 12, admin, and I'll send it to 13. Yes, admin. So now we have the root CA files. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to vManage 1, and from vManage 1, I'm going to enter the V shell. Now the V shell is a Linux kernel, and what you're going to see here is there is that file that I just transported over. So what I'm going to do now is I actually want to install the root CA PIM. I'm going to say that I want to request root certificate chain install, and I'm going to tell it that you can find that root CA file in the home/admin, and it is called sd-wan.pim. Hit enter, and I should now have that certificate installed. In fact, if I come over here and I say show certificate root CA pipe include sd-wan, what we should see here is I have the file that I'm using for our lab, which is SD-WAN Advanced Lab. So before I repeat this process on 2, let's see if that's the case here. So I'll say show control, and we will say, actually, we'll say show certificate root CA certificate pipe include SD-WAN. And we see that it is applied here as far as the SD-WAN Advanced Lab, and let's double check it right here. We will say admin show certificate root CA certificate pipe include SD-WAN. So right now it looks like these files have all been updated to the system and updated as a part of me creating this cluster. So the fundamental component here is that I just want to make certain that I have the root CA installed. If it doesn't show up, you would simply do the manual configuration like I have here in order to actually install it yourself. Now, once this is done, what I want to do now is I want to move toward the graphical user interface again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a CSR. That's going to be a certificate signature request. And what we're going to do is we're going to manually sign it, and we're going to do all of that from the perspective of our Linux machine. And I'll show you the commands to do that. So when it comes right down to it, what we need to do first of all is get a signature request to sign. Right now, you'll notice here, the only thing that I have is my key. I have my Viptela license file. We'll get into that when we start onboarding devices. I've got a Linux distribution configuration and the identity of this box. This is basically admin at 100.100.100.2. That's basically just some configuration information that's been saved on this host. There is no CSR to sign. Let's remedy that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the UI. I'm going to go to configuration, certificates, and from certificates, I'm going to go to controllers. And inside of here, I should see my 3 devices. Now notice, no certificate installed, no certificate installed, no certificate installed. In fact, we don't even have listings for these devices' names other than vManage 1, vManage 2, and vManage 3. There's no operational status. Now, what I want to do is I want to pick the first one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the system to generate a certificate signature request and I'm going to download that request to my hard drive. Notice it's called vManage -1 CSR. Let's see if that actually showed up in my directory. So I'll say ls. In fact, I'll just say ls anything.csr, and sure enough, there it is. Now, this is a request for signature. What I want to do is I actually want to sign it. Now, to sign it, I'm going to up arrow. I'm just going to grab the syntax that I've used 100 times in here. And unfortunately, this is just a command that you pretty much have to memorize. Now, the object of the exercise here is that what we're going to do is we're going to take the CSR file that we've generated and we're going to sign it using the key information that we have. So if I come in and say vManage.csr, and I come down here and tell it that I want to save this as a vManage-1 vManage-1 CRT. I want it to last for 2,000 days. I want to use the SHA-256 and hit enter. This should actually allow me to create the CRT file. In fact, what we'll see here is that it is called vManage-1 CRT. I'm simply going to print that out on my screen using the cat command. So I'll say CRT. Be sure to do the CRT. If you do the CSR, it's not going to work. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy it. And all I'm going to do is paste that into the install certificate section of my console. I'll paste that in. I'm going to say install. And if all goes well, this should successfully install my certificate, and we'll be using our certificate for the successful negotiation of all of our control plane tunnels that we're going to be using in this lab. We see here that it is indeed successful. I'm going to go back to my certificates, and we'll see, if I go to controllers, that we now see data about these resources. Let's go ahead and do vManage 2 and vManage 3. I'll go ahead and say generate a CSR. Download, OK, close. Let's go back into the console. Let's make sure that it's there. vManage 2 CSR. Let's sign it now. I'll just up arrow and change the names to .2 CRT and -2 CSR. I'll cat the vManage 2 CRT file and paste it in, just like we did before. It's not difficult. It just is kind of time consuming, and it's not something that you're going to want to do over and over and over in a lab environment. But it is what it is. So let's go ahead and paste it in. Wait for it to complete, and we'll do the third one. So the object of the exercise here is to get all of these resources signed. And then we're going to fix that database. So let's go in and we will go to certificates and sign the third and final vManage certificate. So generate CSR, download it, and close. And then we'll get it signed. Just for expediency, I'm just going to sign it. Cat it. Copy it. Paste it. Install certificate. Hopefully it will do its thing. Let's go back to certificates. We should see that these resources are under controllers. They do show up as being valid. And what we want to do now is let's see if we can't dive in and take a look at it from the perspective of the main dashboard. And if all goes well, I should see no invalids. I have 3 vManages. These vManages are operating in a vManage cluster, and we've accomplished what we wanted to accomplish in this portion of the task. Now, the other part of this that's also going to be useful for us is going to be to take a look at one of my vManages. And what I want to do is, from the perspective of the vManage, I want to look at that database. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say request, and I'm going to do tab complete. And what I want to do is I want to take a look at the configurations in here, and you'll notice here I've got this NMS configuration, so Network Management Services. And what I want to do is I want to look at the output for, let's say, my configuration database. And what I want to do is I want to get the admin user information. And what we're going to see is this resource is using this name and this password. These are default, and that's what that message that we were getting when we first logged into our vManage. It's telling us, hey, you're using the default username and password to secure your configuration database, which is not best practice by any stretch of the imagination. So what I want to do now is I actually want to change this, fix it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and instead of saying get, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to update the admin user, and it's going to ask me what the current name was, which is why I printed it out here. I'm going to just say Neo4J, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a new password. We're going to go ahead and just call this NXOS1234 $. It's going to ask me to re-enter it. Oh, that was the new username. That's not what I wanted. Current user. I'll just cancel out of this and we'll redo it. Current username was Neo4J. The password was password. The new name is going to be sd-wan admin, and the password is going to be NXOS12345 $. We'll wait for it. And then I'm going to end up implementing this change on each of the 3 devices. So while that's happening, I'll come in here and do the exact same thing. Request NMS configuration database update user. It is Neo4J. Password. The new username is going to be sd-wan admin. The new password is going to be NXOS12345 $. And lastly, I'll change it on vManage 3. And vManage 3. So same thing. It's going to be a request NMS configuration database update admin user Neo4J. Password was the old one. The new one is going to be sd-wan admin. The new one is going to be NXOS12345 $. And we'll simply wait. And again, this isn't necessary for the purpose of the lab, but I get a lot of questions about this specific message in production. And I just want to take this as an opportunity to try to walk you guys through how that particular situation is going to be remedied, especially since we're doing day 0 build. In other words, we're installing controllers. So now what I want to do is just verify the console, make sure everything's good to go. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move to a conversation about the vBonds. Let's take a look at the cluster management. Now notice, doesn't seem to be letting me access anything. Let's take a look at vManage 1. vManage 1, vManage 2, vManage 3. Now again, why am I doing this? I'm doing this to make certain that you guys are aware of the fact that there are some things that you do not want to do in production, and this is one of them. This has impacted the availability of the console for the purposes of management. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and let's see if I can't just get back in. So what we'll do is we'll do an admin, control, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and hit admin again. And let's see if it lets me in or if it gives me a error message. All right, so right now, notice we've got a problem. vManage 3 says there are 2 devices that are in quote-unquote alarm. Now, let's take a look at this. So again, we'll go down to the management. We'll go to cluster management. And what we're going to find is that some of these devices are not in a 100% ready state. Notice that the application server is running on 1, but it's in alarm in 2, and you'll notice that it is not running in 3. And we can see here that we have the devices that are reporting the situation. So the fact that this application server is out of sync with this application server in vManage 2, so between vManage 1 and vManage 2, vManage 1 is reporting that state, citing the fact that there is an inconsistency. Also notice that vManage is actually, vManage 3, excuse me, is not showing as having an operational function. Now what I want to do is I need to wait. I'm going to step back and see if these resources right themselves, and if everything comes up and is operational, then we'll proceed. If not, we're going to have to do some troubleshooting. So let's go ahead and see how long it takes for these things to actually correct themselves, if indeed they do correct themselves. All right, guys, we can see here that everything has basically corrected itself. Just understand that whenever we make any configurational changes to resources that are actually part of a functional vManage cluster, what ends up happening is we have to wait for those changes to actually be ironed out between all of the resources that make up the cluster. So now we've got all greens across the board. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like from the perspective of our main dashboard. And from the main dashboard, we should see everything is all green. And now the time has come for us to move on to our conversation about onboarding the vBonds. vBonds are the orchestrators of our SEN infrastructure. The secure extensible network is made possible through the installation and deployment of the vBond. The vBond's job is to orchestrate the control and the management plane. It's also going to be that single point of authentication that we're going to use for any device or resource, whether it's a controller or whether it's a WAN Edge device. It's the responsibility of the vBond to distribute lists of vSmarts and vManage devices and resources to all WAN Edge components that we're attaching to our fabric for the purposes of sending data. It's the vBond that allows us to be able to employ communication behind network address translation firewalls, whether they're full cone or whether they're partial cone configurations. And it's also important to note that since this resource must be reachable by everything, it is recommended that it actually has a public IP address, although one-to-one NAT is supported. The vBond is highly resilient as far as being able to be made highly available through the deployment and the utilization of fully qualified domain name resolution. This means that what we're going to do is we're actually going to assign a specific resource or a specific group of vBonds in such a way that they're actually going to have the same name, and that name is going to be the fully qualified domain name. And what we'll do in our lab is we're going to employ an iOS device, specifically the gateway router, like I mentioned before, as a DNS server that is actually going to be performing round-robin configuration between 2 vBonds that we're going to have operational and working in our environment. The next thing it's also important to understand is the vBond, like the vManage, has the capability and functionality to support multi-tenant environments or single-tenant deployment models, whether you're a service provider or whether you're just a straight enterprise consumer of SD-WAN services. So it should come as no surprise that what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into our lab and we're going to begin building our infrastructure and adding our 2 vBonds to our SEN fabric, which is going to put us one step closer to having all of our controllers onboarded. You'll notice in our environment, we actually have 3 resources that have the vBond icon associated to them. This device we're going to deal with a little bit later. This is going to be a ZTP server, or Zero Touch Provisioning server. So right now, we're just going to exclude it from our conversations. Our primary focus are going to be involving vBond 1 and vBond 2. So as we did with the vManage, I'm just going to simply attach to these devices their console, and we're going to provide the basic configuration for each. So I'm going to log in, admin, change the password back to, or set it as the original. So admin. I want to keep that for everything. And I want to call your attention to this. A vBond is actually just a vEdge that is configured to perform the role of a vBond. So when we look at this, it's going to be really important for us to pay attention to a couple of differences. One of the main differences is going to be the fact that the vBond, if you notice in the configuration here, is using a Gigabit Ethernet 0.0 interface for its VPN 0 configuration. Again, if you want to learn more about the theory, you need to look at those deep dive lectures. But right now, that's not what we're here for. What we're here for is to get these resources onboarded. So let's go ahead and do the configuration for each of these. Now, judging or looking from the perspective, I'll go ahead and just minimize this one to get it out of my way. What I want to do is I'm going to look at vBond 1. We can see that's its IP address. We know that its system IP address is going to be 172.255.255.3. So let's go ahead and start getting this thing configured. So we'll just do config. From the perspective, we'll enter system. And we'll go ahead and assign it its host name. Host-name is going to be vBond1. And system IP is going to be that 172.255.255.3. We are going to identify the organizational name SD-WAN, ADV, lab. We are then going to give it the identity of the site. So we'll say site ID is going to be 1000. And next, I need to identify the vBond. Well, I am the vBond. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a variation of the syntax, and I'm actually going to say the vBond is me. I'm going to use my IP address of 100.100.100.3, and I'm going to use the local keyword. Now, the local keyword tells this device that it is a vBond, so it knows to actually assume those roles. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the VPN 0 interface, and from the VPN 0 interface, I'm going to provide the static default route that we provided for the other components, and again, it's going to be the gateway of last resort, which is 100.100.100.1 from site 1000. We're going to go ahead and identify the DNS server that we are going to be using, which again was going to be 172.16.100.100. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go into interface Gigabit Ethernet 0.0 and give it its IP address 100.100.100.3/24. I'm going to do a no shut here, but I'm also going to do something also that we haven't done so far because this is a vEdge, and we haven't talked about vEdges yet, but it's important to understand that vEdge interfaces are going to operate in tunneling mode by default because they are designed to send data. So what I'm going to do just for the time being is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say no tunnel interface, and that's going to stop that behavior. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to commit and quit this configuration. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just dive into vBond 2 and do the exact same configuration there, recognizing the fact that vBond 2 is not part of Site ID 1000. We're just going to go ahead and call it Site ID 1001, and it's going to have a different gateway of last resort to get off of this network segment, and that gateway of last resort is going to be 100.100.100.254. In fact, I need to change this in the lab illustration. So here we'll do admin, we'll do admin. Then what we're going to do is config. We'll go to system and start the process here. Host-name is going to be vBond-2. We are going to say our system IP address. In this instance, we're going to say it's going to be 172.255.255. And I'm just going to put a 2 in the value from the 4th octet here, so it's going to be 23. And again, I just arbitrarily did that because remember, the system IPs, if you go back to your non-TLDR theory, need to be unique. So I'm just assuring that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go, my site ID is going to be 1001. My organizational name is going to be SD-WAN ADV Lab. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the identity of the vBond, which is going to be me, and my address is going to be 100.100.101.3 local. And local tells me that I'm going to be a vBond. So let's go ahead and exit. We'll go into VPN 0 and provide the routing information. IP route quad 0. And that's going to go to 100.100.101.254, like I mentioned before. You'll have to take my word for it. We'll verify it. And the DNS server is going to be located at 172.16.100.100. And my interface of gigabit Ethernet 00 is going to be IP address 100.100.101, and it's going to be 3/24. I'm going to no shut that, and I'm also going to get rid of the tunnel configurations. I'll do a commit and quit. And I'm going to proceed and see if we can't get this configuration up and operational by adding the devices and resources directly to the vManage. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get that to happen. And to do so, I need to get into my jump box. And from my jump box, what I want to do is I need to make the necessary steps to set up the root certificate. So if I go into vBond 1, and from vBond 1, I say show control, and we say local properties. What we'll see is it does indeed say that the root CA certificate is installed. However, what I want to point out here is that just because it says it's installed does not mean that it is the correct one that's installed. As an example, if I say show certificate, if I say root, so certificate root CA certificate pipe include SD-WAN. Let's see if it does indeed say anything about SD-WAN. And what you're going to find is it doesn't. Now, that shouldn't come as a major surprise, because what's happening here is that we have a certificate from the manufacturer, from Viptela/Cisco. Now, what I want to do is I want to make certain that I can install the sd-wan.pim file that we've configured and used when we set up the vManages. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get that to actually work the way that we need it to work. So in order to make that happen, I'm going to open up a terminal session. So I'm going to go into my mate terminal. I'm going to go ahead and make this larger so that everybody can see real well. I'll expand it, and I'm going to change my directory to the download folder, and that's where we've been working before, and this is that file in question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say scp sd-wan.pim, and I want to send it to admin at 100.100.100.3. I will say yes for the fingerprint and say admin, log in, and transport the file. Now what I'm going to do is do the same thing, only this time it's going to be for 101.3. We'll go ahead and send yes, admin, transfer the file. Now that this is done, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and see if we can't get this installed. Remember the command? It was request root CA cert chain, or root cert-chain, and what we're going to do is we're going to say install, and that file should be in the home/admin SD-WAN. If I tab complete and it actually does what I expect it to, I know the file is there. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the second vBond. I will access the second vBond, and we will use request root CA cert chain install, and we will say it is going to be in the home admin SD-WAN sorry, PIM. And now my root cert chains have been installed. So if I say show certificate root CA pipe and say include SD-WAN, we should see that we see the proper certificate that we have. Now, bear in mind, this is just my root CA. Now, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and do the necessary steps to add these two vBonds to my configuration. And in order to be able to do that, I'm going to return to the jump box. We're going to go back into the graphical user interface. We're going to go to certificates. Actually, we need to onboard first, so we'll go to devices. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to controllers, and we're going to add a new controller. The controllers we're going to add are going to be vBonds. Now, I'm going to do this one at a time, and I'll explain why here shortly, but I'm going to do 100.100.100.3, which is vBond 1, and I'm going to tell the system, do not generate a CSR at this time. In fact, what I want to do is I'll tell the system when to generate the CSR. Let me see if I can get this, and we'll hit add, and it should go ahead and add the vBond to the list. So let's see what happens. And it did add. So at this particular juncture in time, it was just slow. So what I want to do next, notice it says certificate status not installed. Now we've given it the root CA, and since we are using enterprise configuration, we need to actually sign the certificate ourselves. We do that by going to the configuration, certificates, controllers, find the vBond in question, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the three dots, and now I'm going to tell it to generate the CSR. Now what ends up happening is I'll be able to actually download the CSR file to my hard drive, but notice it's going to call it undefined.csr. Now, we're going to want to modify that. So I went ahead and saved it. So if I go back into my CLI and I do an ls, I should actually see the undefined CSR. Now, I happen to know that this is for vBond 1. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to move the undefined CSR to a new file called vBond-1 CSR. Hit enter. Now, notice all that really did was just change the name of undefined. It just moved undefined to the placeholder for vBond. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to use the open SSL command. So we'll say open SSL x509-REQ. We're going to do -n, and this is going to be the vBond CSR. We're going to use the certificate authority, which was built in sd-wan.pim. We're going to use the certificate authority key, which was sd-wan.key. We are going to use the CA create serial. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to put it into an output file called vBond-1, and it's going to be good for 2,000 days, and I want to use SHA 256. So this should actually get me squared away, good to go, whatever we want to call it. Open SSL X. So let's go ahead and give her a try. And I fat-fingered the CA key. I did a cap, and I should have done a lowercase. There we go. So ls. Now you'll see that I have a vBond 1, and still fat-fingered it. So I'll just move vBond 1 to vBond 1 CRT. And we'll fix that here shortly. So let's go ahead and cat that. vBond 1 CRT. And we'll grab it and copy it, and we'll paste it in just like we did on the vManage. So right click, copy. Go to install certificate, and we will right click and paste and install. Hopefully everything will work out properly. And it added. So next, let's do the second vBond. So go to Devices, to Controllers. Notice we have the vBond here. I will add another controller. I'll add another vBond. And the reason that I do these in sequence like this is so I can keep track of the .csr files, because everything's going to be undefined from this point on. So in this particular scenario, let's go ahead and say 100.100.101.3. And again, I turned off Generate CSR. Let's see if it adds. It did. Let's go to Devices. We'll go down to our certificates, Controllers. We'll find that vBond. It's the one that does not have a certificate installed. We'll generate the CSR. We will download that CSR to our hard drive. We will close. We will go back into the config. Remember, ls, I need to change undefined. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to say move undefined CSR to vBond-2.csr. And now if I repeat the command, it should actually create the certificate. And there we go. So we'll say cat vBond2.crt. We will highlight and copy and paste it into the install certificate field. So copy, install certificate, right click, paste, and install. Alrighty, we see that the configuration has been done successfully. Now again, let's go to our main dashboard and see if we see anything about two vBonds. And what you're going to find is we do not. Now this is not a surprise. In order for the vBonds and the vSmarts to actually successfully show up in our configuration, we need tunnels. And you'll remember I expressly went in and disabled the tunnels in the vBonds. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and onboard all of our resources. And after onboarding all of our resources, what I'll do is I'll go in and enable the tunnels everywhere on the 3 vManage, on the 2 vBonds that we just did, and on the 3 vSmarts that we're going to do in the next portion of the demonstration. So the next controller we're going to focus on is going to be the vSmarts. And in this lab, we're going to have 3. And again, keeping in the tradition of keeping the theory down to a minimum, it's important for us to understand just a handful of things about the vSmart before we dive in and we really start taking a look at getting one configured. It is going to be the responsibility of the vSmart to allow me to expedite the creation of the actual fabric, the exchange of information, the ability to be able to learn routes from a given WAN Edge device, place that information inside of a routing table, and then advertise that information to other resources that have the same VPN configured on them. In this capacity, the vSmart functions very much like a route reflector in our BGP environments, except it doesn't have the condition of fate sharing. The object of the exercise here is that when we employ a vSmart, the vSmart exists outside of the data plane, outside of the data path. All devices are going to form relationships, peering relationships with the vSmarts in order to be able to employ overlay management protocol to advertise information between endpoints. It's the job of the vSmart to actually step in and provide that point of aggregation where all of the information is going to be placed. With that being said, it should only stand to reason that it would also be a very, very solid and reliable place for us to begin looking at doing manipulation. Therein is how a vSmart differs from a route reflector. A route reflector, by its very nature, learns information and then reflects that information towards route reflector peers. Now, in the situation with the vSmart is going to reflect that information by default to all device that has the matching VPN where that information is actually being originated. Now, obviously, if I want to be able to change that behavior, I have that capacity, and I can employ the idea of policies in order to be able to manipulate that behavior. It also needs to be mentioned that the vSmart controllers are going to be highly available in the form of IP reachability, and we're going to learn when it comes time for us to onboard our WAN Edge devices that these devices are actually to form multiple peering relationships, specifically to at least 2 vSmarts by default. Now, in our lab, we have 3, and what we're going to do is we're going to dive right in, and we're going to start the configuration of those guys immediately. Okay, let's turn our attention to the lab and go ahead and open up our first vSmart. And what we'll do is get our baseline configuration in here. So it's going to be admin, admin, just repeat the passwords. And from this perspective, all I want to do is config, and we'll go into system and we'll provide all of the missing information. So now what we're going to do is, we'll say host-name. It's going to be vSmart-1. The system IP address is going to be 172.255.255, and this device is going to be .4. The site ID is going to end up being 1000. The organizational name is going to be sd-wan-advanced-lab, and the vBond is going to be vbond.micronicslab.com. And now we have all of the essential information. Let's go ahead and move to VPN 0. We will provide the IP routing information to 100.100.100.1. And I'm going to notify it of the identity of the DNS server, 172.16.100.100. All of this is unchanged. Interface, Ethernet 0. IP address of this device is going to be 100.100.4/24. We are going to no-shut this. And all I'm going to do now is say commit and quit. This is going to put the first vSmart in the proper state to actually be onboarded. So let's go ahead and knock out vSmart 2 and vSmart 3. So again, I'll just drag it down to where we can see the interface configuration and admin. So we reset the password where it belongs. Host-name, vSmart-2. The system IP, 172.255.255. In this case, will be 5. The organizational name, SD-WAN, ADV, lab. The identity of the vBond is going to be vBond.micronicslab.com. And we need to put the site ID in, which is going to be 1000. Move over to VPN 0. We will provide the information for the routing. DNS, as well as the interface configuration for Ethernet 0, which will be IP address 100.100.100.5/24. We will no-shut this interface and commit and quit. Now we will move down to the vSmart 3. Now please bear in mind that vSmart 3 is not located in Site 1000. We've been calling this Site 1001, and we'll keep with that vein of config. So we'll do admin, admin, config, system, host-name, vSmart 3, system IP, 172.255.255, and I'm going to do 24 by adding 2 to the 4th octet. Organizational name will be sd-wan-advanced vSmart-adv-lab. The site ID will be 1001, and the vBond will be located at vbond.micronicslab.com. We will move to VPN0, IP route. Now we want a static default route that is going to take us off of the segment that this device is on, and this is going to be 100.100.101.254. We need to provide DNS resolution 16.100.100, and interface Ethernet 0 is going to require its IP address of 100.100.101.4/24. We will no shut this. We will do a commit and quit. And just very quickly, I want to do a little verification. I'm going to say ping www.google.com, and we've got reachability, and we see that we are resolving. And all I'm going to do now is let's go ahead and move the information to the devices so that we can actually start the onboarding process, which means we're going to have to transfer that sd-wan.pim file to these 3 devices. To move those files, I'm going to go ahead and minimize vSmart 3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open the jump box and transition over to the CLI. From the perspective of the CLI, I'm going to SCP the sd-wan.pim file to admin at 100.100.100.4. Log in with admin, transfer the file. I'm going to go ahead and transfer it to .5. And I'm going to transfer it to 100.100.101.4. Now all I'm going to do is go to vSmart 1. And from the perspective of vSmart 1, what I want to do is see if I can't install that root CA PIM that we called sd-wan.pim. So in this instance, I'm going to say request root certificate chain install, and the file that I want to install is going to be in that home admin sd-wan.pim. We'll go ahead and get that installed on the other 2. So I'm going to go ahead and open up vSmart 2. Request root cert-chain install home admin sd-wan.pim. And we'll do the third one. Request root-cert-chain install home admin sd-wan.pim. And now we have those files installed. And the next step is going to be to actually start the signature and CSR process. So again, that's going to be done from the perspective of the user interface. We're going to go to our configuration, certificates, and what we want to do is we want to actually onboard the vSmarts, but what we'll find here is those vSmarts have not yet been added. So that's going to be the next part of this process. I'm going to go to configuration, devices, and what I'll do is I'll onboard the vSmarts one at a time, just like we did everything else. So that means I'm going to go to controllers, add controller, and we're going to add the first vSmart. The vSmart will be located at 100.100.100.4, and the username is admin, password is admin, and keeping the tradition, I am going to not generate the CSR at this time because, again, what I want to do is I want to actually add the CSR manually. And remember, when we actually save it, it will be an undefined name. So now let's go down to certificates. And from certificates, we go to controller. And what I should see here is my first vSmart, which I do. I'm going to request the system generate a CSR. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to save that to the hard drive. And again, remember the undefined.csr name. And all I want to do now is just like we did for the vBonds and the vManage, we're simply going to sign that certificate after we change its name. So I will say move undefined CSR to, we will call it vSmart -1.csr. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the open SSL command to sign it. I'll just up arrow until I get to the last time that I used that. And we will modify the name accordingly. So this will become vSmart -1 CRT, and then we will be using the vSmart 1 CSR. I'll just tab complete that over. We hit enter. That's going to create it. Now what I want to do is I want to cat that CRT file, vSmart.crt. We will copy that and paste it into our user interface. Copy. We go to the device in question. We go to install certificate. We paste that in. Hit install. And it should actually add this device to our infrastructure. Let's wait and see. There we go. So next thing, let's go ahead and go back to configuration devices, and we'll add the second vSmart. So again, to controllers, add controller, vSmart. This device is going to be located at 100.100.100.5. Do not generate the CSR. Let's see if we can add it, which we did. We'll now go to the certificates, generate the CSR, and get that thing signed. So it's this one right here that has no cert installed. We request the CSR be generated. We download it. Go to the CLI. From the CLI, we move it. So I'm just going to up arrow until I get to move. And this time this is going to be vSmart 2. I'll up arrow till I get to the open SSL. And all I'm going to do is just change 1 to 2. We cat it. Copy and paste. Now all we want to do is add the third and final vSmart. So we go back to configuration, devices, controllers, add controller, vSmart. This one is going to be located at 100.100.100.101.4. I'll say that again, 100.100.101.4. Do not generate the CSR. We go to certificates. From certificates, we go to controllers. Find the one that is missing its certificate. We click on it and say generate the CSR. Save that file. Rename it, and then we will sign it. So again, easy enough. We go into the CLI. From the CLI, all I'm going to do is just up arrow and rename it to vSmart 3. And then I'm just going to sign it by changing the 2s to 3s. Hit enter. Cat vSmart 3 CRT. Paste that in, and this portion of our configuration will be complete. Copy. Install certificate. Paste. Install. Wait for the device to be added. And we see the device has been added to our infrastructure. All right, let's take a moment here and talk about what we've just done. We've transferred the sd-wan.pim file that we've used for our root certificate. We had generated CSRs for all of our controllers, vManage, vBonds, vSmarts alike. We have signed those CSRs and we have installed those certificates into our vManage controller for the purposes of bringing up our SEN fabric. However, it must be noted that at this particular moment in time, our controllers are not all going to be up. What I mean is they're not going to appear in the user interface as usable resources. And I want to go ahead and call our attention to that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the steps to resolve that issue. So from the perspective of the graphical user interface, if I go into the main dashboard, from the main dashboard, what we're going to see is that nothing except for our vManage appear in this listing. Now, the reason for this is the fact that we do not and have not configured any tunnels. I'm going to minimize my screen. And what I'm going to do is minimize all of these devices. And I want to go first to my vManage. So I'm going to double click on each of my 3 vManage. And all I'm going to do is go into the VPN0 interface of each of these and enable my tunneling mode. To do that, I will say admin, configure, VPN0, interface Ethernet 0, and I will say tunnel interface. I will say commit and quit. Just repeat that command on all of these devices. And lastly, the third vManage. Next, I'm going to do the exact same configuration on the vBonds. But please keep in mind, vBonds are just vEdge devices. And as a result of that, we're going to be using the Gigabit Ethernet 0.0 interface. I also have to call your attention to the fact that since this is a vEdge, it will be required to actually employ encapsulation IPsec. If we don't do that, it's not going to allow us to make the configuration. But let's go ahead and dive in and get that part of the equation taken care of. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to vBond 1. And from vBond 1's perspective, log in, admin, config, VPN 0, interface, Gigabit Ethernet 0, and I'm going to say tunnel interface, and I'm going to specify encapsulation IPsec, like I mentioned previously, and I will do the commit and quit. Go ahead and do vBond 2 while we're here. Config, VPN 0, interface, Gigabit Ethernet 0.0, tunnel interface, encapsulation, IPsec, commit, and quit. Now, obviously, the vBonds are not the only devices that we have to be concerned with. We've done the vManage, we've done the 2 vBonds. Let's go ahead and iron out the 3 remaining vSmarts and see if we can't put this topic of controllers and high availability as it associates to controllers to bed. So in order to be able to do that, let's go ahead and hit the vSmarts. And remember, the vSmarts are going to actually have interface Ethernet 0 are going to be the ones that we're going to be using. So I'll say admin, config, VPN 0, interface Ethernet 0, and I'll just simply say tunnel interface, commit, and quit. Open up vSmart 2, admin, config, VPN 0, interface Ethernet 0, tunnel interface, commit, and quit. And the last vSmart is going to end up being this guy right here. Admin, config, VPN 0, interface Ethernet 0, tunnel interface, commit, and quit. And we should have everything that we need configured with a tunnel. And the direct outcome of this, if everything works properly, when we go to the graphical user environment and we look at the main dashboard, we should see little green arrows next to 3 vSmarts, 2 vBonds, as well as 3 vManage. As part of our final verification, I'm going to log into the lab environment and make certain that everything is green. So admin, and this should take us directly to our primary dashboard. And what we're going to see here is that we have 3 vManage operating in a cluster. We have 2 vBonds operating in fully qualified domain name resolution with round-robin load balancing on gateway. And we have 3 individual vSmarts that are functioning as far as our control plane environment in this specific lab and this specific environment. So I'm pretty proud of the way that things have turned out. What we've done is we've gone from a completely empty SD-WAN infrastructure to a fully functional deployment. And this fully functional deployment is going to serve as the test environment for us to be able to proceed as it relates to onboarding WAN Edge devices. Now, in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to actually begin paying careful attention to what's involved in bringing routing and forwarding constructs into our topology. I mean, we can't lab if we can't send data from one site to another. And the way that we do that is going to be with the concept of WAN Edge devices. Cisco CSR 1000 Vs, Cisco ISR Vs, Cisco Catalyst 8000 Vs, as well as the Viptela devices are going to be things that we're going to look at in the virtual construct world. But I also want to bring in some actual ISR 4300 series routers so that you can see exactly what happens when we start bringing devices in that are actually going to have TPMs, devices that have cryptographic ASICs. So until that video, my name's Terry Vinson, and I am very, very grateful that you guys stuck with me this long, and I hope to see you in a future video. Till then, take care, and I'll see you in the next class.